don't want to waste your time, so let's dive right in. Gear doesn't really matter. If you have a camera, that's great. If you want to use your phone, go ahead and do that. What I'm going to show you in this video applies regardless of what gear you own. Just don't fall into the trap assuming that buying expensive filmmaking gear is going to magically improve your filmmaking skills. It won't. Start with the basics and put in the hours first. For me, cinematic footage heavily depends to a certain extent on how good the lighting is. If you're just starting out, I would suggest using natural light to your advantage. You've probably been told like a million times by now to shoot during golden hour because of how soft the light is. It's not bad advice, as long as you make sure you don't restrict yourself to only shooting during those hours. Ideally, you should be able to film in any lighting conditions. Use soft light, use hard light, use anything. Again, you don't need to buy a ton of expensive lighting gear to get good results, nor do you need to learn every single lighting technique in existence, and trust me, it does a lot. I'll only show you one thing, and I promise you once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It is used in literally every movie that's ever been made, and for good reason. And you can start applying it to right now, for free. It is called shooting on the shadow side. All it means is that you want to be on the same side of the subject as the shadow. In other words, you want to be on the opposite side of where your light source is coming from. Okay, let's take a look at some examples to show you what I mean. Take a look at where the light source is coming from and where the camera is situated. We are here on the screen left, on the shadow side. Again, very similar type of situation. Look where the camera is. It's on the same side as the shadows. Alright, let's take it a step further and see how this works with medium to wide shots. This seems to be like a backlit shot to me, but the same theory applies. Let's analyze it. Where is our light source? It's behind the subject, facing the camera. Where is our subject? It's between the light source and the camera. And finally, where is the camera? It's placed in front of the subject, oriented towards the subject, with the light hitting the subject from behind. So once more, we are on the shadow side. The great thing about this is that it works with anything, not just people. It all depends, of course, on what the goal is and how the lighting is being motivated in the scene. But in general, I find it extremely hard to go wrong or make something look bad when you're filming on the shadow side of your subject. I've created this diagram to clearly show the difference between the key side and the shadow side. This will help you visualize how it works and where the line of each side ends. This is arguably the most difficult aspect of filmmaking to learn. Why? Because it's something that is not teachable. Therefore, there's no right or wrong way to go about it. But what is it? Composition refers to how a shot is framed and composed, meaning how all the elements inside the frame are arranged. Elements such as people, objects, and even light. You might be wondering why this is useful. Composition is used to control the narrative, and it almost forces viewers to look at and pay attention to certain characters or points of interest in a shot. You might have heard the terms rule of thirds or leading lines being thrown around quite a lot in the film industry. They're fine for what they offer, but please do not get pigeonholed into thinking that these so-called rules are indicative of what composition really stands for. A pleasing composition often relies on depth, scale, symmetry, and balance. Depth creates a sense of distance and layers within the frame, making a scene feel more dynamic by placing objects or characters at varying distances from the camera, which in turn adds visual interest and dimension. Scale emphasizes the size of a subject in relation to its surroundings, whether making something appear towering and powerful or small and vulnerable. It allows the audience to feel its significance in the story. Symmetry can create a sense of harmony and order, while balance, whether symmetrical or asymmetrical, ensures that visual weight is evenly distributed, keeping the frame pleasing without feeling chaotic or lopsided. These are just some of the many techniques used to form compositions that not only look beautiful, but also serve the story. It's one of the ways I like to create separation in my work. What is it? It's that blurry background that makes your subject pop. What I've noticed, though, is that people in general, and beginners especially, tend to go crazy with depth of field. But it's not always the right choice. In fact, I urge you to be critical and conservative almost with how and when you choose to shoot with a shallow depth of field. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a brilliant way to create layer separation, although it's not the only one. And this is what we're going to talk about next. This is one of my go-to ways for making my shots look cinematic. What do I mean by that though? When I talk about layer separation, I'm referring to the visual distinction between the foreground, midground, and background of your shot. But another way to look at it is by thinking how to separate your subject from its surroundings. Why? Because layering your shot adds depth and dimension. My favorite thing about this is that it can be done in so many ways. Think about using objects, people, architecture, or even nature. Backlighting, for example, tends to create a silhouette type of effect. Roger Deakins is known for using this technique, and it's so pleasing to look at. Rim lights and or hair lights are also great for providing a clear separation. Lighting the subject brighter than the background or vice versa is another way. Wardrobe and set design, for example. Dress the subject in colors that contrast with the background. Another one is parallax, which is a lateral side-to-side movement of the camera, which can create a parallax effect, which is when the background moves differently from the subject, emphasizing the separation between the two. What about negative space? The use of negative space draws the viewer's eyes to the subject. In many ways, layer separation is a combination of everything I have mentioned in this video so far. It is an infinitely complex puzzle, and every piece matters. What do you do with that camera when you hit that record button? This one is entirely subjective, and I don't have a particular opinion on what you should or shouldn't do. Most directors have their own style, so this is something you need to figure out on your own. If it helps, here's what I like to do. I shoot either entirely on a tripod, so static, or I shoot handheld. When I am moving the camera, I'm always thinking slow and steady, unless the shot calls for something more shaky, of course. When I am shooting handheld, it's worth noting that I rig up my camera as heavy as I can. Why? Because the more weight you have on your camera, the more it helps removing those micro jitters. It works to an extent, but keep in mind the higher your focal length gets, the more difficult it is to stabilize. Whereas the wider your lens is, the more stabilized it will be by default, as micro jitters are far less noticeable. I think this is the most neglected part of all. I call it post-processing because that's what it is. I'm not just color grading my footage, I'm also processing it to look a certain way. Whether it's adding film grain, glows, halation, color is not the only thing that's being altered. Color grading is an entirely separate art form from filmmaking, and it is just as complicated. Do not use LUTs when you're first starting out. You will only hinder your progress. I repeat, learn the basics and do them well. You don't need LUTs. Create your own looks, it's far cooler. What does cinematic actually mean? I feel like we skipped this point entirely. In essence, it just means something that looks like it's from a movie or relates to the cinema. Otherwise, the visual qualities or aesthetics of a film. That's a useless definition, right? Who gets to define what actually makes something cinematic? It's not very clear. I mean, is it composition? Is it camera movement, focal length, depth of field, lighting? Is it acting or storytelling? Maybe it's lens flares. Well, it's all of those things, and none of them at the same time. The problem with labeling something as cinematic is that one person might be using it to refer to the composition and lighting, whereas someone else might be exclusively talking about mood and color. And so this is why I don't particularly like using this term, as it's often thrown around lightly, as if it has a universal meaning. It doesn't. It can be whatever you want it to be. And that's why each person has their own unique understanding of what appears to be cinematic to them. It does not have any explicit definitions as to what qualifies as being cinematic and what does not. And that's fine. It doesn't need to. It does, however, have one insanely beneficial quality though. It makes people click on videos like these. Thanks for watching.